And you're live.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone.
I hope you all can hear me all right.
Ariana, do you have your phone on? Because we're getting some feedback.
Maybe they're too nearby.
Everyone, we're sorry about that. Well, that was a wake-up call. So I'm Frank the Bee Man. I just want to thank everybody for joining us. And we're going to wait till Ariana gets back in the picture, and then we'll get started. But thank you very much. And as I'm sure all of us have faced with technical difficulties throughout all our Zoom calls these last few months, but we'll get started now. It's Ariana, do you have two things going at the same time? Do you have another tab open?
Yeah, let me close the tab. Oh, okay.
She had two of the same tabs.
There you go. How's that?
That's fantastic. See, it all works out in the end. So we're all ready to go. So Ariana, why don't you kick us off?
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ariana, and this is Eli. We are owners of ChicagoHoneyTruck, your local honey suppliers, and we'll be moderating today's event. And thanks again, Barbara, for hosting another event. So here we have Frank Mortimer. Welcome. Author of Bee People and Bugs They Love.
How you doing, Frank?
I'm doing good, Eli. It's nice to see you guys. And just really want to thank you for hosting it. And yeah, big shout out to Barbara's Bookstores in Chicago. And for everyone that's tuned in tonight, I grew up outside of St. Louis. So a big fan of being in the Midwest. So I'm excited to be here. And all the way down in St. Louis, we know about Barbara's. So you guys are lucky to have it by you. And I hope that you'll show the support for events like this and buy my book or buy other books from Barbara so they can keep doing what they're doing.
For those of you that don't know, Frank Mortimer is an instructor at Cornell University, Master Beekeeping program. He's also the vice president of the New Jersey State Beekeepers Association and a certified master beekeeper. He's also married with 3 kids. How old are your 3 kids?
My son is 17, and then I have a 6-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old daughter.
Yeah, awesome.
Nice.
And they all work because no one's for free in my house.
Oh.
Yeah, as I understand, you guys all do beekeeping as part of the family, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's a big part of how our family defines ourselves is by doing bees, and then as you know, how much goes into bottling honey. So it's all that kind of stuff that we do.
Yeah, extra hands are definitely always useful, right?
Yes. So why don't you quickly give a little give your bio about the ChicagoHoneyTruck and what you do.
So yeah, we're a small business here in Chicago. Our main focus is to provide the city of Chicago, our friends and neighbors, real good honey, good quality honey. And we work with a beekeeper that he doesn't live in the city, but he has a big network with farmers in Michigan, Illinois, and parts of Florida. And it was started a long time ago with my mother. She ventured into entrepreneurial world, and just along the way, she met a beekeeper, and she started bringing that honey here to the city. And over the years, it just, everybody loves it. You can taste the difference between real honey and like store-bought honey, which I don't think it's real honey. It's processed and manufactured, in my opinion.
Yeah,
and,
I always say it's good to know your beekeeper. So that's great that you guys are traveling around doing that.
Exactly, yeah. And even though we're not beekeepers yet, which we're aspiring to be soon, we know the beekeeper personally, and our product speaks for itself. It's we let everybody try it, and that's how we're trusted.
That's great. Yeah, and if you want to get started in beekeeping, I do know a good book that would help you.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. We're excited to get through all of it for sure. So we're very glad that we get this opportunity to meet you and then run into the perfect book.
So tell us, how did you get started?
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't know anybody that kept bees. I was never around bees, but just something since I was a kid, I thought it'd be fun to be around a big ball of stinging insects. And so finally, even though I grew up in the Midwest, which makes more sense to keep bees out there, I didn't start until I moved to New Jersey, which is the Garden State, by the way. And that I went to a lecture at a local library. And what surprised me is that that during the person's talk that he said that there was a local beekeeping club. And so New Jersey is the most densely populated state, and I live in the most densely populated area. So I was surprised that there was other people like me that lived in this area that would want to keep bees. And then so I joined the club, which is always my first recommendation to anybody that wants to get into beekeeping, and then started my journey into it.
Nice.
And then after a few years of being in the club, then I was elected president, and that whole story, how that happened, is in my book, which is kind of funny. And just have been very involved. I've been keeping bees a total of almost 15 years now.
Okay.
So in your book, you talk about the relatively recent inventions that have made modern beekeeping possible. Can you talk a little bit more about those?
Sure. So the all of modern beekeeping started with Reverend Langstroth in Philadelphia in 1851. And what he discovered is what we now call bee space. And what that is that if you think of like our houses have hallways, so in a hive, that if you leave 3/8 of an inch, that's like a bee hallway, and they'll never connect across from that with comb. And so because of that, you can take out the frames, which is important because then beekeepers are able to pull out the frames of comb and they can inspect it to see if it's healthy, if the bees are healthy. And then also when we go to harvest the honey, that we can pull the frame out, we can uncap the honey, the wax, take out the honey, and then we can put the comb back in or reuse it. And why that's important for the honey is that it takes bees have to consume about 8 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax. So by being able to reuse the comb, that it's less energy that the bees have to spend creating new wax. And then prior to Langstroth's hive, which is now used around the world, that bee space, we used to use skeps. And if you've ever seen pictures of those like upside down baskets, that's what a skep is. And to get the honey out of that, you had to, a lot of times people would kill the bees, or you'd have to move them all out, and then you'd have to crush the comb to get the honey out. So that's why the Langstroth was really the grandfather of modern honey. Then the second invention, and all of these were in a 15-year time period and were invented here in the U.S., which I think is amazing because we've been keeping bees since the ancient Egyptians. That there's hieroglyphics of them where they would have use hollowed out logs as their hives. And then predating that, even in there's cave paintings over 35,000 years old where people were collecting honey. So if you think of for how many tens of thousands of years humans have been doing honey, and then within this 15-month period here in the U.S. is where these inventions came up with that have now revolutionized honey consumption around the world. So the second one was embossed wax, which is that because we want to maintain that 3/8 of an inch, I guess I should do it that way so you can see, that we need to have starter wax so the bees will build the comb in the direction that we want. And the rollers for that were first developed here so you could have any size sheet of wax. The third invention is the smoker. And the reason that beekeepers use a smoker is that bees communicate in two ways. The main way is through smells. Only bees don't have noses; they have antenna, and then that's one of their superpowers because they can smell through that. So, by giving off these pheromones or smells, that if you use a smoker, that it blocks it. So I say it's like when kids are in school and the fire alarm goes off, that they know to go outside, but a smoker acts as it blocks it. So even though that fire alarm is going off, it's like the kids couldn't hear it, so they're going to keep doing what they're doing. And so what was invented was this part, the bellow, so you could just puff it and direct the smoke where you wanted and how much. And then the fourth invention that was invented was the extractor, which is essentially it's a drum that uses centrifugal force that you put the honeycomb in, and by turning it, it spins the honey out, and then it's collected at the bottom. And so that was first mass produced here in the U.S. It wasn't invented, but because of that, we were able to produce more honey, and the end result is that people could eat more honey.
Is it true that honey doesn't have an expiration date, or is it?
That's correct. Yeah, and I'm going to turn around and ask you about that in a second too. But yeah, they found honey in the Egyptian tombs that was still edible, and the reason for that is that when nectar comes into the hive, it can be up to 80% water, and then the bees have to boil that off. And I'm air quoting boil, but it's kind of think of like how humans make maple syrup. You start with 5 gallons of sap to get 1 quart of maple syrup. Same kind of thing. They bring in this nectar, and then they have to get rid of all the extra moisture, because honey is less than 19% moisture. And then by the bees doing that, they're also adding enzymes to the nectar. So they're converting the sucrose, which is what the nectar is, into more simple sugars of fructose and glucose. And by doing that, our body, all our cells can absorb, and theirs too, can absorb that sugar faster. And that's why they do it. So because honey is has so little moisture in it, and because when the bees are breaking it down into fructose and glucose, one of the byproducts of that is hydrogen peroxide. So because of those two factors, if any germ or microbe lands on the honey, it gets killed. And what's interesting about that is that honey is used in today is used in medical bandages, and there's been scientific studies that show that honey can actually help wounds heal faster than any kind of antibiotics in modern medicine, which is wild to think about.
Yes, that's amazing. We actually gotten quite a few people approach us and tell us how much it's helped them with their wounds, and it's just an amazing story to hear. You know, like this honey is just so it's antiviral and or antibacterial, right? So it's capable of doing these things, which I guess healing these wounds that sometimes is just harder to do in other forms.
Yes, and also too is as a cough suppressant. Like, so again, there's medical studies done to show that honey is as effective as over-the-counter cough syrup, especially the kids' versions. So it's like, what would you rather feed your kids? Some sort of medicine or just some all-natural honey? You know, I know which line I'm going to be in.
For sure.
And it can also be a very a substitute for sugars. That a lot of people use sugar in their coffee, and I've had so many customers they don't even consider putting honey in their coffee. And I mean, I like to say it tastes even better.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It tastes better.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for those that haven't really experienced local honey, when you go down to the ChicagoHoneyTruck, you'll see that honey is kind of like wine in that it has all these different flavors of up and down notes. And that's how you can really tell the difference between real honey and something that's sugar-based, because, think of when you eat sugar, it's just flat sweet. There's no other smells or tastes. And that's why I think it's great with honey. You get great with coffee, because if you add the right honey to it, it can really enhance the coffee flavor.
Yeah, or tea, right?
Or tea.
It's one of the main ones.
And what's interesting, since we're talking about sweetening coffee and tea, is that it takes 12 bees' lifetime work to make 1 teaspoon of tea. or honey. So every time you sweeten your tea, that with that teaspoon, that was 12 bees' life work to do. And so when you extrapolate that, it takes just under 1,200 bees to make 1 pound of honey. And then that 1 pound of honey that bees are making, they had to visit 2 million flowers. And to get to those 2 million flowers required 56,000 flight miles, which is twice around the globe at the equator. And that's for 1 pound. And then the whole reason that honeybees make honey is so that they have food to eat through the winter. So to get through the winter, especially Chicago winter, each colony is going to need 60 to 80 pounds for themselves. So then you start doing the math of 80 pounds times 2 million flowers, and it gives you an idea of why they say busy as a bee.
Is honey the only thing that bees produce?
So yes, because bees will collect pollen from flowers, but they're not changing it. They're just so bees, their entire body is covered in fur or hair, and even out of their eyeballs, they have little microscopic hairs growing, which makes it really hard for them to wear glasses. But so as the bee is flying through the air, think of like when you walk on a carpet in the winter with static electricity. So that sort of happens when they fly. So when they land on a flower, then instead of a spark, all the pollen from the flower is attracted to the hair on the bee's body. And then the bee grooms themselves and pushes all that pollen down. They have these saddlebags under their rear legs. And so they'll carry the pollen back to the hive to use as protein, because in bee pollen, or excuse me, from flowers, so pollen in general, per ounce has more protein than chicken breast.
Yeah.
Wow. So is that why people like during this time they start having their allergies start kicking in, because bees are flying and carrying all this pollen
And the flower is blooming and
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and then so what's interesting is that the bees that eat the pollen they do that so that they have the nutrients necessary to feed the developing baby bees, which we call brood or larvae. And so think of like, for prenatal nutrition, if a mom is feeding a child, that that she's eating and drinking certain things to help her produce food for the baby. So it's the same with the bees. By them eating the protein, they're able to do it. Like, did you ever hear of royal jelly?
Yes.
Yeah.
So royal jelly is kind of like bee milk, and bees have this gland in their head, and they secrete royal jelly from their head, and that's what they'll feed developing queen larvae with. And then for worker bees, they also have, it's a similar substance, but it's worker jelly that they secrete from a different gland in their head. How would you like to be able to squirt milk out of your head?
I'm not sure I like that. So in essence, is royal jelly more potent or more is it better than honey itself, or which one?
I would say not. See, I'm not a proponent of royal jelly, because to harvest that, you have to trick hives into thinking that they're producing queens. And then it's a fertilized egg gets laid by a queen, and then the worker bees will decide if that egg will develop into a worker bee or a queen bee. And then, so what they'll do, if it's going to be a queen, this is in the hive, that the bees will draw out the wax. So think of, this is what normal honeycomb looks like. So imagine if out of one of those cells, think of a peanut in the shell made out of wax. And so it literally looks like that. So the bees will build this extra area, and they'll feed that larvae the royal jelly instead of the worker jelly. And by doing that, that larvae will develop into a queen bee instead of a worker bee. And the differences between those two bees is significant, because a worker bee only lives for 6 weeks, and that any bee you've ever seen is a worker bee, and that lives for 6 weeks, and its stinger is barbed, And that's why when a bee stings you, it dies because it pulls itself apart because its stinger and abdomen is stuck in you. A queen bee, her stinger develops straight, and that's because she doesn't ever use it as defense. Like she'll never sting a person. She only uses that to that when a queen is first hatched out, the workers will never make just one. They make several queens to ensure that one survives. So the queen has a straight stinger so she can go and eliminate the other ones that haven't hatched out yet, because it's only one queen per hive. And then a queen bee, instead of living for 6 weeks, can live for 2 to 4 years. So it's pretty wild. Like that's the difference between them. And then a queen is the only one with a fully active reproductive system, and a worker bee doesn't have that. And so what a queen bee, when it hatches out, she goes on a mating flight once in her life where she'll mate with drone, and a drone is a male bee. And the interesting fact or trivia about drones or males is that they don't have stingers. And you can tell the drones because they're bigger and fatter. They're like have a dad bod, and then they have giant eyes, so it looks like they're wearing goggles. And that's because bees mate up in the air. And then, so think of like these areas that are like bee single bars up in the air. And so the drones go up there and they're just cruising like they would in a singles bar, waiting for a virgin queen to go up. And the queen will mate with up to 24 drones on that flight. And then after the males mate, they actually break apart and fall to their death. But they do die happy. And then once the queen has been with 24 drones, she has enough reproductive material to last her lifetime, and she goes back to the hive and she starts laying the eggs.
Is there any situation where like there's more than one queen? Or
the only time is when if two would hatch out at the same time out of those peanuts that I was talking about, then that's why they'll use their stingers and they'll actually fight to the death. And what's kind of cool is queens do this thing called piping, and it's they can move their wing muscles, and it actually sounds like a little flute. And what it is that the two queens are smack talking each other, and they're saying where they are in the hive so they can find each other so they can fight. But you can actually hear it, and I've heard it because that means that my hive had produced extra queens. But it's like it goes and that's these queens doing it. But then from that noise they can find each other. Then like I said, they'll fight it out to the death so that the strongest one lives.
So you can actually hear them, like it's very noticeable then.
Yes.
That's interesting. I imagine like a lot of bees at once, it would be hard to tell, but it sounds like it's pretty noticeable then, right?
Yeah, it's pretty noticeable. It's it's like listening to the old Kenny G that you just recognize it when you hear it. That's a musician who's much older than you.
So do you just let them, in their natural process, kill each other off, or would you like take one on and put them in a different hive?
If I did my job correctly, then I would have seen that was happening, and I would have, before they hatched out, I would have been able to take care of the situation. But by the time they had hatched out, I did it wrong. And that's part of, like, in my book, like I have one whole chapter called Bee Mistakes. And, we all know that you can learn from your mistakes. And I always say that some of my mistakes are so big that I can teach an entire nation.
That's good that we can learn from them as well.
Yeah.
So in your book, you write about a study that was discovered that more than 75% of honey sold in the U.S. was not pure honey. What is it, and what is raw honey or pure honey?
Sure. So there's been multiple studies done, and the thing is that honey is the second most counterfeited food in the world. Olive oil is the first one, and that's why we always say that you should know your beekeeper when you buy honey from them. But a lot of times what's happening is that honey that gets imported into this country before it gets here is mixed with different types of sugar syrups. So it could be, just regular sugar cane mixed with water. It could be a rice syrup, or it could be a high fructose corn syrup. But in all natural honey, there's minute particles of pollen, and so what happens in the cases where I'll call it a honey blend, is that they super filter out all pollen, because then you can't trace where the honey came from. And that's also significant because in some countries that they will use different antibiotics and things to keep the bees healthy, that the USDA has said is unhealthy and can actually be harmful to people. So you're not allowed to bring honey in from there. But because of all the counterfeiting, it's still finding its way in. So again, it's important to know your beekeeper when you're buying honey. And so what is raw honey? That a lot of people don't realize this, but when the bees make it, it's liquid. So when I have the honeycomb, when you break off the wax, liquid honey pours out. And so what qualifies as raw honey is that the honey is never heated above temperatures that can be found in the hive. So like if you ever, like the super cheap honeys in the big box stores, a lot of times we'll say pasteurized. And once honey is heated to that temperature to be pasteurized, it's no longer honey. So a lot of that stuff is just more of some kind of honey flavored syrup. And Eli, like you said, it's not real honey.
Yeah.
100%
agree. When honey crystallizes, can you explain that? Why does it happen? And because some people believe that's mixed with sugar, and we've gotten a few people that say that when. I'm sure can you explain that a little bit more?
Yes. And what I actually tell people is the reverse. If your honey crystallizes, then the good thing is that it's 100% honey, because anything that's mixed with any non-honey substance won't crystallize. And so what it is that honey is what we call a supersaturated liquid, which means that it shouldn't be holding as many solids as it is. And remember, because how the bees boil down the nectar and get rid of the moisture. So that's why it's super saturated. And so what happens is that the glucose molecules actually pull out of the liquid. And then once that pulls out, then other glucose is attached to it. And then that's what gets the crystals. And then so whenever that happens, you can just heat the honey back up, again, maintaining the temperature of the hive. So nothing higher than 104 degrees. And it'll liquefy again, and you'll be set.
Nice.
So the number one message is, if it crystallizes, then you have natural honey.
Yes.
I wonder where all that rumor came from.
Well,
we've gotten quite a few.
My guess would be that because the crystals look solid, so and you think of like sugar cane that you buy, granulated sugar. It has, sometimes can have that same consistency, would be my guess. But again, sugar is sucrose. So if you had diluted that into your honey, then there wouldn't be enough glucose molecules for it to crystallize.
So earlier we were talking about the process of different types of honeybees, and you were kind of getting into the process of making honey. What's the process of taking honey from the hive and bottling it? How do you start to finish?
So that I pull out the frames. So back to Langstroth, I pull out one of my movable frames, and then the bees, once they know it has the right moisture content, then they cap it with wax. And I always find it interesting that as people, we need what's called a hydrometer to measure the moisture content of honey, and they're bugs and they can just do it. So they cap it with honey. So what I do is I pull out these frames, and I have this big fork that I just go to try to break off the top piece of wax. And then I put these frames into an extractor. An extractor is like a big drum that spins around. And then from that, the centrifugal force makes the honey pop out of the comb, collect on the side, and then gather at the bottom. And then from that, I put it through a strainer, which is like a colander, just to catch any pieces of wax. and then it goes into a bucket. And then when I'm ready to bottle it, I then put that bucket into my a filler bucket, which has like a little, we call it a gate, but it's like a little valve that the honey comes out of. Kind of looks like a soft serve ice cream valve. And so then I just put it right in the jar. So it goes from frame to extractor to bucket to at some point bottle.
Okay.
Perfect.
Does the viscosity, level of viscosity always an issue when bottling it up, or?
Well, it's back to what some of the what happens with the unethical commercial beekeepers is they'll heat the honey up, and the reason they do that is to change the viscosity because it's more liquid, so they can move through more honey through the pipes faster. But because I'm doing mine when it's cooler, it's not quite like soft serve ice cream, but it's more similar to that than like a liquid. So it's just, getting the bottle under there and then just timing it. And then like, I just continually do it. So I just, when it's about to fill, then I just put the next one under.
I can imagine your kids along with you handing you the jars, right?
Yes. Now, how about you guys? Like, tell me about how you bottle your honey.
Well, we work with the beekeeper. He pretty much does everything. He's got his own thing going on. So we really just pick up the honey from his bee farm, and then we bring it back to the city. So everything's already ready for us. We did go through the process, to kind of like get an idea how everything works. We've known him for since I was young, so probably like 20 years already. I've known him. And we've been working with him ever since, and just bringing his honey to the city. That's our main purpose.
That's great. I'm just checking the time. Should we see if there's any questions?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, feel free to ask it. There's a button you can press at the bottom of the screen, right bottom.
It says ask a question. You just click on that. It looks like there's 3 in there, right?
Yes, so let's see. So let's see. One of them is honey healthier than sugar? Read an article that claimed honey is sugar with good PR.
Well, I would say that honey's better than sugar because it's more simple sugars. By being fructose and glucose, that means that it's not sucrose. And so when your body consumes any kind of sucrose, it first has to be broken down so it can be absorbed by our cells. But because honey's already broken down, then our body can utilize it better. And let's face it, honey tastes better. So if I was going to pick one or the other, I'm going to go with honey.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. What's your favorite honey type?
So I harvest twice a year. So I harvest in June and then again in late July. And I prefer my June honey. It's very light. And that's what, again, like wine, like, if somebody has their favorite winery, that, you depending on what year it comes out, it can taste a little bit different. And the same was true with honey. Like my hives are in the same location. They never move. And yet year over year, there's variance in what the taste and the color is. And the reason for that is that honey is 100% dependent upon the flowers for its taste and color. So if the bees in one season are going to a higher percentage of one crop over another, then that's going to affect the flavor of the honey.
Okay. Next question. Is it true that local honey helps with allergies?
So there's no scientific proof that proves that local honey helps with allergies. So first and foremost, you have to say that. Now, the thought behind why people consume it for allergies is because it's the same as like a vaccine, that if your body is ingesting honey, there's little particles of pollen in that honey, and theoretically that helps your body build up a resistance. So anecdotally, there's a lot of people who believe it, but there's no science behind it.
Okay. So if you get another question, so if you get stung by a bee, it's a male bee and not a female bee, correct?
Turn that around. It's a female bee.
Okay,
That
a female bee.
the boy bees don't have a stinger, and it's really, I always like to tell, especially because I do a lot of talks at schools for kids, and I always like to say that a hive is like girl power, because it's the workers that do everything, and then the queen. Because the drones only have the one job, which is to mate, and they actually can't even feed themselves in the hive. So the workers have to feed the drones while they're there. And then what happens is that come after mating season, which is like late summer, fall, that if any drones that haven't mated, then the workers will first stop feeding him, and then they'll chew off his wings and throw him out of the hive to die, because his use is up.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Does anybody have any more questions?
I would also like to point out, if you want to get a copy of your book, you can get 10% off using the code. There's a little button you can click on. 10% off. That's awesome.
Well, and I guess I'd like to talk too that while, because we talk so much about bees, but a big part of my book is about the beekeeper. Like, there's been so many great books written about all the bee facts and the how-tos, and this really gets into all the different wacky and eccentric characters that I've met along the way. And I always say that, the normal reaction when you see a big ball of bees hanging from the side of a building or a lamppost is to go the opposite direction. But a beekeeper's like, ooh, bees, and they run towards it. And so my book gets into what type of person is that would want to do that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it. So far, I've been reading the one with the one-eyed
The one-eyed bee guy.
The one-eyed bee guy, yeah. I've been reading into that one. It's interesting because he's
Interesting character.
he's using bees. He stings himself, right, purposely.
He stings other people. People will pay him. So this is a 90-year-old man with one eye, and people will go to his house so he can sting them with a bee. And it's called apitherapy. And the reason behind that is that, again, there's no medical proof of this, but people believe that the sting can help with certain medical problems such as rheumatoid arthritis or MS. And the reason is like, sometimes a doctor will inject you with cortisone, and what happens with a bee sting is your body naturally produces what's called cortisol, and that's what cortisone is meant to mirror. Only it's cortisol is the body, cortisone is man-made, and then so that plus how the blood all rushes to the site where the sting is, they think can lead to people getting cured.
Yes.
And is that scientifically proven, or is it more like a?
There's no science behind that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, an interesting story. Someone actually came up to me and was telling me about how it's an older man. I believe he's got Parkinson's disease, and doing the bee stings, he got rid of some tremors. So it was pretty crazy to hear a story like that.
Yeah, again, some people swear by it and say it works, so it's always cool. Is there another question now?
Let's see here.
Oh yeah, I think there's one more. Let's see.
Does that work?
Probably the bee stings, the apitherapy.
Yeah, it's like I said, there's plenty of people who believe it, and I get into this in my book. And it was started by a beekeeper out of Vermont, and I honestly, off the top of my head, I can't remember what year it was, but he was kind of the grandfather of it all. But there's apitherapists across the country who do this, and then sometimes people will also go and buy a box of bees from a beekeeper, and they learn to sting themselves to help them with different afflictions. So, I mean, the thing is, like with you're going to have a certain reaction to bee stings, I always say, like, to me, it kind of feels like I did a double shot of espresso because the adrenaline that gets released when you get a sting. So, so it's yet another reason not to fear bee stings, because it can actually be good if you like coffee and caffeine. And
does anybody have any more questions?
Oh, yeah, it looks like there's another one.
No, I think.
Oh no, this was that was in reply to getting stung. That was
Gotcha.
Louisa.
Well, since we're talking about getting stung, how about I'll read one of my favorite stories about making mistakes from my book.
Oh, please.
Most of my monumental mistakes usually begin with me saying, let me just do this real fast. Whenever I think I'll just move at a faster speed or that I'll get something done zippity quick is when the bees remind me that it's always better for me to take my time and never ever rush. The first time my soon-to-be wife experienced her first bee sting was when I said, I need to feed my bees some more sugar syrup. I'll be right back. Let me just do this real fast. Then, because I was focused on working fast instead of watching what I was doing, I made a series of mistakes that led to my surprise that she still married me, soon-to-be wife, getting stung on her right thigh. Since I was going to be moving fast, I thought I'd skip lighting the smoker, which led to alarm pheromones getting released and putting the bees on high alert. Next, I haphazardly laid the inner cover, which was covered in a fair number of bees, against the side of the hive. And when I went to pour the syrup into the hive top feeder, I bumped into the inner cover, causing it to topple over and land on my never screamed but couldn't believe what I had done, surprised that she still married me, soon-to-be wife's feet. Once the inner cover hit the ground, the bees became airborne, and the one that landed on my bride's thigh decided that she had had enough. Thankfully, once my so much smarter than me, never screamed but couldn't believe what I had done, surprised that she still married me, soon-to-be wife realized that she had been stung. She immediately walked away from the hives, went back to the car, and waited until I was done. Now, whenever she accompanies me to the hives, the first thing she says is, did you light your smoker?
That's funny.
Great.
So do you generally just sell the liquid honey in jars? Do you do any creamed honey or anything like that?
Well, we have some jars that crystallize, and we like to keep them. We don't like to heat them up or anything. So we introduce those and sell those as well. And also, we use that as an opportunity to educate people that, honey does crystallize, and it's a good thing if it does. It shows you, as you said, it's real honey.
Got it. Yeah. So I like another story from my book is that my wife is from Sweden, and then so one of the trips over there, I did what people normally do when they go to Europe, is I found a local beekeeping club so I can hang out with a bunch of people I didn't know, and so when I was over there, that they tend to eat what's we call creamed honey, which is like solid honey. And what that is since honey naturally crystallizes, there's a way to control the crystallization so the crystals are small or smooth. And so when you eat it, it kind of tastes like vanilla icing. Like it has that consistency to it. It's 100% honey, but it's just it's controlling those crystals so they stay fine. And then once it's hard, it stays hard forever. So that is a benefit. Then you don't have to worry about it crystallizing and getting grainy. But it's extra work to make it, but it's great because I eat a lot of honey. You can just scoop it with a spoon and eat it.
Nice.
Do you talk about that in your book?
I do. It's and I talk about there's a U.S. method of making it called the Dice method, and that's named after a professor whose last name Dice, who taught at Cornell University, and that's who the bee lab is named after.
Okay. So I hear that to make that you need a seed, which is pretty much. Is it crystallized honey, or is it a little bit different than just?
It's 100% honey, but what it is so every year that I make it, I save some of it for the next year. So that way I always have that smooth honey that I start with. And the reason is that once you have that texture, which means that the crystals are really small, that when you add it to liquid honey, and the glucose comes out of the liquid and connects to the other glucose molecules. They're so small, it mimics those small ones and just repeats itself. Versus if it's just a jar that slowly crystallizes, then those get to be big crystals, and that's why it's more grainy. And that's what's fascinating too. Like if you think about around the world, how many different ways people eat honey, like others eat it in the comb, so like you can see like Ireland, for instance, that at their breakfast buffets, they'll have out one of those frames that I was talking about, that people just go and they scoop out as much as they want, and eat it that way. And that's because the wax, it's funny that honey in comb at one time we used to call farmer's gum, because you could just chew on it like gum and you had the taste of the honey in it. So you can consume it, and it's just like gum. Some people swallow it, some people spit it out, but it's fine either way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've always been curious as to, can you digest that, the beeswax? And I know it's edible, but for me, preferably, I don't feel like it's digestible for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's like it's personal choice, but it's interesting with the wax because bees have glands on their abdomens, and so they'll secrete it out, and there'll be like 4 little plates of the wax, and then bees have what's called mandibles, which are like little fingers by their mouth, and that's what they'll use to manipulate the wax into whatever shape that they need. And honeybees are very hygienic. Like they never go to the bathroom in the hive. They'll always, even in the winter, they wait till it gets above 42, and they'll fly out of the hive to go to the bathroom. And because of that is why we can use wax in cosmetics, and lip balms and things like that.
Yeah, and their propolis, right? It's very, that's what they use to protect if anything comes in. I think they use that either to seal and to protect against any like mites or anything like that.
So it's what the propolis is like if you've ever touched a plant and it's sticky, that the bees will collect that and they add enzymes to it. And it's also, the propolis is very antimicrobial and antibacterial. So they'll put that around the hive, inside the hive, which then it's kind of like your grandmother who sprays Lysol all over her house, that by putting the propolis around it kills germs. So you had mentioned the mite, and so let's talk about that for a second. That the number one thing that's killing bees across the globe is a non-native parasitic mite called Varroa destructor. And Varroa jumped species to bees, and it came into this country in 1987. And that's what's decimating the world bee population. And the reason is that the mite feeds on the developing baby bee. So again, think of prenatal nutrition, and imagine if there's a parasite sucking the nutrients out of that baby. Second, that the mites are a vector for bee diseases. Only affect bees, don't affect people. But think of the world we're living in with social distancing. Bees can't social distance. I've tried to talk to them about wearing a pollen mask, but they won't do it. So because of that, the mites are actually getting more dangerous because they're spreading more viruses to bees, which causes them, they're able to wipe out bees faster and more efficiently. So the big joke with beekeepers is that we talk more about mites than we do about bees because it's that serious. And then there's a full chapter in the book that talks about the history of the mite, what they're doing, and also what we do as beekeepers to try to combat that.
Yeah.
How can we be, what can we do to help bees as a society?
Great question. So first and foremost is you can buy local honey, because by buying local honey, that you're helping the beekeeper continue to do what they're doing, which is have bees out there that pollinate. And the thing to remember is that 1 in every 3 bites of food that we eat is thanks to the honeybee because of their pollination. And so by supporting your local beekeeper, then you're supporting the pollination services that his bees are doing. And even if you don't live in an agricultural area, like I live in the suburbs, that bees also pollinate trees and plants. So if you want your yard to look good, you want bees around it. So that's number 1. Number 2 is in the spring, let a few dandelions grow in your yard. I'm not saying you need a whole lawn filled with them, but just leave a few, because dandelions are one of the first things that bloom, and that's what bees go to get their pollen and nectar. The third thing would be to limit how much chemicals you're putting on your lawn. That goes for both fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides. That if you cut back on that and let some of the native plants grow, then that's also going to help bees and other pollinators. And the last thing would be to plant native perennials. And when you plant them in bunches. And by having perennials, you know that they'll come back year after year. And if they're native, then again, that's helping not just the honeybee, but all sorts of other native pollinators, such as bumblebees and such.
Looks like we got more questions coming in. Want to read one of those?
Yes. So, is there a native bee in the U.S.?
Yes. And so what? So good question. Who asked this? So the honeybee is not native to North America, and what I also think is interesting is that most of the food that they pollinate is also not native. It's like apples, oranges, almonds. All that fruit was brought over with the European settlers. So imagine what this North America must have looked like before any of that stuff was brought over. It was like you had corn and wheat, and that's pretty much it. So the answer is yes, there are bees that are native, but they're not the honeybee. So like there's thousands of different species of bumblebees, and then tens of thousands of other native pollinators. Like the sweat bee is a good example of that, which those are like the metallic looking green bees that are pretty cool. So yes, they are native bees, but they're nothing that we can get honey from.
Okay. We have another question here. What is the life cycle of a honeybee?
So the queen lays an egg, and then from the time that egg, if it's a worker bee, from when that egg is laid to when it hatches out, takes 21 days. And so a honeybee is kind of like a butterfly. And instead of starting as a caterpillar, it starts as a larvae. But it does go through a metamorphosis. So it makes a little cocoon inside one of the cells and emerges as an adult bee. So that's why you'll never see like a tiny little baby bee flying around. So now what's interesting, worker bee is 21 days. The male bees, which are, like I said, bigger and fatter, it takes them 23 days to hatch out. But what's interesting is the most important bee is the queen. She only takes 16 days to hatch. And so it's interesting how, from an evolutionary standpoint, the most important bee can get created faster, so that way it can serve the hive that much more efficiently. And then so from ages that the worker bee lives in the spring and the summer for 6 weeks, the drones live for I say a season, meaning that there's only a short season when there's that the queen will produce those. And what's interesting too is the queen controls, so she decides, if you will, if she's going to lay a female egg or a male egg. And the way she's able to do that is only the female eggs are fertilized. So the males or drones are not fertilized eggs. They're what's called haploid, meaning they only have half the genetics, and they're genetically a complete replica of the queen bee. And then so if the queen fertilizes the egg, then it'll go female. But so the worker bees live, and then the drones we talked about, and then the queen bee, as I mentioned earlier, can live from 2 to 4 years.
Wow.
Wow. Okay. Nice. Let's see, another question. Can bees coexist with hornets and yellow jackets?
They're natural enemies. So I always say that honeybees and yellow jackets are much different. Honeybees are like dogs. Yellow jackets are like hyenas. And so the way to tell them apart, bees are fuzzy, and then yellow jackets are smooth, and they look like they're made of plastic. So fuzzy, good; plastic, bad. But honeybees are they get all of their food and nutrition from plants. So that's the pollen and nectar that we talked about. Hornets, wasps, yellow jackets are omnivores. So they're scavengers. So that's why you see them around trash cans. But they will also try to sneak into a beehive to take the bee babies and use those as food. So That's why I say they're natural enemies, because the yellow jackets are trying to eat the honeybees.
Yeah.
Speaking of hornets, is there's news that they were coming from, what was it, China or somewhere? Is that still going on, or is are we done?
There
with
was
that?
a scare, right?
Yeah.
I think you're referring to what was deemed the murder hornet, which was the Asian hornet that only established itself. There was one nest they found in western Washington state, and that was destroyed. So that was last year, and there hasn't been any more sightings. And the chances of that establishing and making its way across the Rocky Mountains is slim to none. So for Illinois folk, you're safe, and for us in Jersey, we're absolutely safe.
That's a relief. For sure.
Okay, so we've got another question. What happens to a hive if the queen dies?
So it's when I was talking about how a hive has pheromones or smells how to talk. So when everything in the hive gives off a pheromone, so the queen during the peak of the season, which is now, is laying up to 2,000 eggs a day. And so all the brood, which is the babies, that gives off a pheromone. And then if the queen, towards the end of her life, she can't lay as many eggs, so the intensity of that brood pheromone is smaller. I always say, like, imagine walking into somebody's house that has a kid and smelling dirty diapers, and they have one kid, versus going in a house that has a dozen kids. You're going to be able to tell this by the smell of who has more kids, right? So a similar kind of thing in a hive. So what happens is, as the queen is starting to fail, then that's when the worker bees will start to create a new queen. And then there's other instances as well. But what's interesting is that the worker bees are what control when they're going to create these queen cells, which are those peanuts, so they can replace their queen. Now, if you take it one step further, and let's say that something happened to the queen, like a clumsy beekeeper kills her when he's going into the hive, then what the workers will do, so the queen gives off a pheromone too, and the bees will touch the queen and then keep passing that pheromone around, and that's why the bees know when the queen is present, and we call that hive queen right. And what's interesting, if the queen is removed, and then in 20 minutes, the bees can tell that she's gone because her pheromone is missing. And then the hive will start buzzing. And we call the hive, it's roaring, because it's making so much noise because they can tell the queen is gone. So if a queen were to get killed, as long as there's eggs or there's larvae, which is 1 to 3 days old, then they will grow out the wax and make one of those cells, and then start feeding it the royal jelly, so that some of those larvae can develop into future queens. It's really amazing. It's like the whole thing with beekeeping that I love is there's this whole practical side of being in the hive, but then there's this whole nerd side, because and I'm a self-described bee nerd, and like in the book I have bee nerd alerts, which are little boxes that get into little extra details. But the honeybees are one of the most studied creatures on the planet, because everyone just wants to know about them. And so when you hear things like this, and the organization of the hive is just amazing. And again, like we said, the reason bees make honey is so their sisters, who aren't even existing yet, can have food to eat through the winter.
Okay, I like this question right here. Can a bee change their gender?
They can't change their gender, but bees do change jobs depending on how old they are. So when a bee first hatches out, it's the same. I always tell kids, it's the same job. It goes back in and cleans its room. So it's a house bee, and it cleans up and straightens up. Then it becomes a nurse bee, and it takes care of the babies that are there. And then one of the last jobs it has is to forage, which is when it goes out and gets nectar, honey, or nectar, pollen, or water.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Let's see. Yeah, I think those are all the questions right now.
Okay.
So looks like our time's coming up to an end pretty soon. What's what would you like to leave our viewers before we close tonight? What's the message you would like to leave with? I know you cover a lot of topics in your book, and yeah, what's the message you'd like to leave?
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for being here for this unbelievable nice talk and the buzz that we've had over the last hour. And I would just ask that you visit the Honey Truck so you're getting some great local honey. And then also please make sure that you visit Barbara so she can continue to be such a resource in your community. And be excellent to everybody. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
I think that's it. Have a good day. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Goodbye, everyone.